There is a good chunk of the Republican Party who thinks that we should think before we act, that war is not always the answer, that war may be the last resort, not the first resort, that we have to defend ourselves, we have to have a strong national defense, but that sometimes we've intervened in the Middle East, and sometimes we've had unintended consequences.
Nor does he stop with that. In the upcoming interview, he suggests that Hillary Clinton is more of a hawk than he is. And I'll say this for him, he's also unique on another Republican bugaboo, evolution. Unlike presidential wannabes like Mike Huckabee, he says that the latest scientific evidence of human life on Earth going back millions of years is fully harmonious with his religious beliefs. Well, earlier today, I sat down with the senator, Senator Paul, who has a new book out, Taking a Stand, it's called. He was campaigning in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Senator, thank you for this. In your book, Taking a Stand, you give a very particular prescription for how we deal with the fight against ISIS, protect our embassies, our consulates, and then leave the fighting to the Arab states in the region. What happens if that doesn't work and they end up building a caliphate that seems to last?
Well, I don't think that's exactly what I said. I don't say we leave it to them. I'm more than willing to be a part of the fight. I think providing air support is reasonable, providing armaments to those who are willing and able to fight. So I would armaments to the Kurds as well. In fact, I'd go one step further. I'd promise them a homeland and a state, but I would do it in conjunction with talks with Turkey. It would have to be a three-way discussion. Kurds homeland, but I'd like to get the Turks involved as well. I'd really like to see, and I think the ultimate answer is going to have to be Sunnis that are civilized Sunnis, civilized Islam, rooting out this aberration, because you're never going to, in Mosul, they're never going to tolerate a Shiite garrison. They're also never going to tolerate an American garrison either. We could win the war with our power by going in with 500,000 troops again, but at what cost? And really, the question is, if the people who live there are not willing to fight for it, is there an ultimate victory that we can give them?
If the choice comes down to us going in big time with ground troops and winning the war ourselves and leaving the caliphate, what's your choice? Where do you go?
I think what we have to do is,
if that comes to that,
I think what we have to make a decision is when are American interests involved and what does that mean? And sometimes we get too glibly there. We say there's an American interest. That's the conclusion. To me, the beginning of the debate is, what is an American interest, and does it change as circumstances change? I think that we had an American interest in Benghazi. It's one of the things I've faulted Hillary Clinton over. I don't think she did enough job to defend our consulate there. And I think there's an analogy in that there's a consulate in Erbil and in Kurdistan. There's also a large embassy in Baghdad. Those are American interests. If we are going to stay in the region, we're going to have diplomatic outposts there, we have to defend them. The debate, though, should be in Congress, not just in the executive branch. War was very clearly, that power, the initiation of war was given to Congress, not to the president. So I've been asking, and I introduced actually a declaration of war against ISIS. So it's not that I want to do nothing. I want to do it constitutionally, and I really want to do it in a way that will be a lasting victory, and I think that would include Arab boots on the ground.
You know, we lost 4 people, good people, over in Benghazi. So somebody left the door open, you could say. And yet we lost 3,000 Americans in 2001, and the Democrats haven't been hitting that issue ever since. I mean, don't bad things happen? Why does the Republican Party keep banging on the door of Benghazi politically when the Democrats fairly said, you know, we got hit even though we got warned Bin Laden was going to attack the United States back in 2001. He did. We lost 3,000 people. But you don't hear the Democrats spending the last 14 years talking about it, do you?
Well, I think there's an important question.
What's the difference?
Well, I think there's an important question. I think there's an important analogy, really, between Hussein and toppling Gaddafi. And I think if there's one true thing that we know from the Middle East is that every time we've toppled a secular dictator, whether it was Hussein or Gaddafi, we have gotten chaos. We've gotten more of the rise of radical Islam. And I believe we are more at risk in Libya, not just the Benghazi thing, but because of Gaddafi being toppled and it being a chaotic, failed state, I think we are more at risk for attacks from Libya. But I'm pretty ecumenical with the blame on this thing. I'm more than willing to say that toppling Hussein made Iraq really essentially and for all purposes right now a failed state. And we are more at risk for attacks from ISIS or others because of Iraq being a failed state.
Let me ask you, your book is pretty clear. You say some people are too eager to go to war. And I've watched you over the years, and I think you're very consistent on that. It's almost like they're reading you out of the party. People like Bill Kristol are saying you ought to be a Bernie Sanders or a liberal Democrat. Are they going to get it? Suppose they were. Suppose they're right.
Well, here's the interesting
Are they right that you're the only really person who's not a hawk in your party
Here's
who's running for president?
Some of these pundits who know nothing but glory for war, they live inside the Beltway and have not yet been to America. So I invite them to come to Iowa. I invite them to come to New Hampshire. I invite them to come to South Carolina. There was a poll in Iowa a couple of months ago, and it said, do you believe in more intervention, more foreign intervention like John McCain, or less intervention like Rand Paul? It's almost evenly split. There is a chunk of the Republican Party who thinks that we should think before we act, that war is not always the answer, that war may be the last resort, not the first resort, that we have to defend ourselves, we have to have a strong national defense, but that sometimes we've intervened in the Middle East, and sometimes we've had unintended consequences. And I don't know how you can be an honest, intellectual person to take an approach to the Middle East and not believe that we've gotten some things we didn't really intend to happen.
Well, I think the polling shows that you're right. I mean, you're beating Hillary Clinton, a fairly recent poll in Pennsylvania, head-to-head. You're certainly doing best head-to-head with her nationally, and yet everybody else in your party is trying to be a hawk. And you're the only one that says, no, I don't think the American Republican voter, the regular Republican, not a neocon, not somebody who reads the Weekly Standard, but a regular Republican voter is tired of these wars. Right?
Yeah, I think people...
Well, why does Bill Kristol have all this influence?
He hasn't traveled outside the Beltway enough. You know, once he gets outside into the rest of America, where we live, in Kentucky, where those who live in the middle part of America, or really anybody outside of the Beltway, there's a disconnect between the Washington insiders and the rest of us, in both parties, frankly. Hillary Clinton is much more hawkish and much more likely to get us involved in another war than most of America, Republican or Democrat. You see this little boomlet for other people out there on the Democrat side? There are people who aren't so eager to believe that Hillary Clinton was right taking us to war in Libya. And so I think you'll find that as it gets out to the regular voters outside of Washington, there's a much more mixed and nuanced feeling about war.
On a scale of 1 to 10, Dove being 0, Hawk being 10, where's Hillary?
You know, I'm not sure exactly.
Would she be a 7?
Yeah, well, I think what she is I think she's been indiscriminate in the use of force, and I think not thinking. There are people on both sides that are rational, good thinkers. There's Brent Scowcroft. I'm not sure which side of the fence he's
a
on.
realist.
There's Brzezinski. Both realists, but maybe one a little more Republican, one a little more Democrat. But both... you know, thoughtful men who I think have a profound understanding of world events. And then there are people who are knee-jerk reactionaries that really think war is always the answer. And I meet the young men who have lost their limbs, who have sacrificed their lives. Not one of them is flippant about war. They're very serious about war. And I think we need more of that, maybe in the White House, but also more of that in Washington.
Well, let me be tough. I'll get to the next point in your book, but is big money driving the Republican Party to the hawkish side? These big godfathers of candidates who just come in there and say, I'll give you $200 million, but talk the line.
Big money drives both parties. Big money's big money's in control of both parties. And I have one...
To the hawkish position.
Well, yeah, I mean, just big money in general for a variety of positions. But I have one proposal that I've been putting forward that I think might work. Most of the campaign finance reform has been shot down as in defiance of the First Amendment. There's another way that you could go about this that I don't think would defy the First Amendment at all. What I would do is say that anybody who does business with government, I would write into their contract limitations on their influences of elections. Giving, lobbying, you name it. You could have anything because it would be voluntary. If you get $1 billion contract from government, you're going to provide something for government, you should maybe not be allowed to lobby. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to give at all. Maybe we should regulate your top 20 officers. But you could do it by making it part of the contract. They would voluntarily accept these restrictions. They would not be mandates. They would be voluntary contractual restrictions. I think if we could get unified, both Democrats saying they'd be willing to restrict the unions and Republicans willing to restrict big contractors that do business with the government, I think you might get some of the special interest money out of politics.
Do you think Dick Cheney and Halliburton would go along with that? Let me ask you about that. You've been tough on the Republican Party. You're running as sort of an outlier because you say the party sucks. There's a nice millennial term.
No. I said the brand.
Okay,
sucks.
the brand.
So there's a difference.
What's the difference between the brand and the image?
Well, you remember...
The brand and reality.
What I'm saying is there is hope for redemption in the sense that you remember Domino's? They said our brand sucks, and they redid their crust and they redid their presentation, and Domino's is doing fine.
That's right. It's in the book.
Yeah, and so the thing is,
what was wrong with the pizza crust?
I'm not exactly sure. I think
too much crust.
Well, I'm not sure what it was,
too much.
But they listened, and so I was in the South Side of Chicago yesterday campaigning in the south side of Chicago saying, I've got something to offer for poverty, I've got something to offer for your crummy schools, and I've got something to offer for the fact that both Republicans and Democrats have taken a generation of young black men and put them in jail.